This is the story of a girl that I will read out to you. When my grandmother passed away, I thought I'd prepared myself. She was 90, had been in hospice for 3 months, and the doctors had warned us. But nothing prepares you for losing. The only person who truly made you feel like you belonged. Growing up, my parents weren't really present. My mom struggled with addiction for most of my childhood, and my dad, well, he left when I was 10 and never looked back. Grandma Alice was the one who picked up the pieces. She raised me like I was her own. She didn't just give me food and shelter. She gave me stability, warmth, and love. So when she passed, I didn't expect to be fighting over what she left behind. I didn't even want anything from her. I just wanted her back. But then the will reading happened. It was held in the attorney's office, a small beige building in the downtown strip. The air was thick with tension, even though no one said it out loud. My Aunt Linda, my mom's older sister, sat stiffly beside her husband Ron, both dressed in black like they were going to a Broadway funeral. Their daughter Marla, my cousin, wore heels way too high and kept checking her phone. I was the last to arrive, wearing jeans and the cardigan Grandma gave me for my college graduation. No one said hello. Just a few glances, then silence. Mr. Harmon, the estate attorney, read through the usual formalities. He handed out folders with copies of the will and started going through it line by line. To Linda Martin, my eldest daughter, I leave the family home on Brookridge Avenue and its contents. Aunt Linda clutched Ron's hand and nodded like she deserved it. To Marla Martin, my granddaughter, I leave the emerald necklace passed down from my mother. Marla gave a tight smile, then went back to texting. To the Church of St. Catherine, I leave $25,000 in honor of their kindness to me over the years. I waited, then I kept waiting, and that was it. Mr. Harmon looked up, adjusting his glasses. That concludes the reading of the will. I blinked. Wait, that's it? There's nothing else? He looked at me with a faint grimace. I'm sorry, Ms. Ellis. That's the full executed version. There was a silence I'll never forget. Marla turned toward me with a smirk and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, Guess Grandma didn't think waitressing counted as a real job. Aunt Linda didn't say anything. She just avoided my eyes. I lived with her, I said, my voice cracking. She raised me. Why would she leave me nothing? Ron cleared his throat. Well, maybe she felt like she already did enough for you. Enough? She raised me because no one else would. She fed me, paid for my school clothes, helped me fill out FAFSA, drove me to my community college every day until I could afford a car. She helped me get through my first breakup and taught me how to balance a checkbook. That was enough? Mr. Harmon seemed uncomfortable. I understand this is difficult, Ms. Ellis. Wills can be surprising, but this is what your grandmother signed. It was notarized and legally filed. The folder in my lap felt heavy. My hand shook as I closed it. Was there a letter or anything for me? Something personal? He frowned. Nothing that I'm aware of. I left without saying another word. Back in my apartment that night, I sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling. Every memory of my grandmother, her humming while making apple pie, her reading mystery novels with a cup of tea, her garden, filled with lavender, played in my mind like a movie I couldn't pause. None of it made sense. And yet, legally, it was over. The house, the jewelry, the money, all gone, all to people who barely even saw her in the last few years. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really did think she'd already done enough. But that didn't feel like her. Still, I had no way to prove anything. No will. No note. Just a feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. Then, 3 weeks later, a knock came at my door, and everything changed. 3 weeks passed. I went back to work at the diner. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Not my co-workers, not my friends. It was too embarrassing to explain how the woman who raised me forgot to include me in her will. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was just being sentimental. Maybe Grandma really had meant to keep it simple. Maybe Aunt Linda had pressured her, but what could I do about it now? I boxed up what few keepsakes I had, mostly old photos, a few of Grandma's scarves, the garden journal we used to write in when I was a kid. She called it our memory log. It was silly, but it meant the world to me. That was all I had left of her. And then came the knock. It was a Sunday afternoon, just after 3 p.m. I remember because I had just pulled banana bread out of the oven, one of Grandma's recipes, and was letting it cool. The knock wasn't urgent, just steady, calm. When I opened the door, a man stood on the other side, late 60s, maybe older, with a clean button-up shirt tucked into jeans. He had a kind face but looked nervous. "Are you Emily Ellis?" he asked. "Yes?" He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced. My name's Walter Harris. Your grandmother asked me to find you, if things didn't go the way she hoped." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. It was old, slightly creased, sealed with a red wax stamp, and my name written on the front in Grandma Alice's neat handwriting. "Before she passed," Walter said, "she gave this to me and said, 'Don't open it, don't mail it, hand it directly to Emily if she ends up left out.'" Her exact words. I just stood there. I took the envelope with both hands. The wax seal had a tiny impression in the center, a lavender flower, just like the ones we used to grow. Walter cleared his throat. "She was worried, said there was tension in the family, that someone might try to take advantage." My voice cracked. "Why would she trust you with this?" "I worked with her, years ago. I was her banker, helped her set up a trust fund when she sold part of her land. We stayed in touch after I retired. She said I was the only one she trusted outside the family." I opened the letter inside gently. It read, "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means what I feared has happened, that you were left out of the official documents. I tried to do this the proper way, but I know how your aunt and uncle operate. I knew they'd try to push you aside like they always have. The truth is, I left something for you, but I had to be discreet. They watched everything I did in my final months. If you still have our garden journal, you'll find a note inside the back cover. That will lead you to what's yours. I'm sorry I had to hide it this way, but I never stopped loving you. Not for a second." "Grandma Alice," I was shaking by the time I finished. Walter said nothing. He just stood there, respectful. "Can I offer you some tea or something?" I asked, voice low. He smiled gently. "No need. I've done what I promised her I'd do." Then he turned and walked down the hall, leaving me standing there with a letter that felt like a second heartbeat in my hands. I pulled the garden journal out from the box I'd packed weeks ago. My hands trembled as I opened to the last few pages. The back cover was thick, thicker than I remembered. I felt along the edge and discovered a slit. A small folded paper was tucked inside. I pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. It was a scanned copy of something legal, notarized, dated, signed. At the top, private will, not to be filed without holder's consent. My name was at the top of the beneficiary section. My grandmother had left me something after all. I didn't sleep that night. I kept rereading the document, trying to understand what it meant. The title read, "Private Will and Testament for Informal Distribution," and it was dated 6 months before Grandma's death. There was a clause explaining why it hadn't been filed with the court. "This document is to be kept confidential unless circumstances require its disclosure, in which case the named recipient has sole discretion to present it." And there, halfway down the page, and was my name. "To my granddaughter, Emily Ellis, I leave the lake cabin located at Willow Bend, along with its contents and the trust fund tied to its maintenance and improvement. I know she will find peace there, the way I always did. I trust her with it because I know she will never take more than she needs and give more than she's asked. The lake cabin. I knew about it, of course. Grandma used to go there every summer before her health declined. She'd tell me stories about the wild blueberries growing behind the deck, the loons calling at night, and the old rocking chair on the porch. She stopped visiting a few years, ago, and I'd assumed she'd sold it or let it go. Apparently not. I barely remembered the address, but the note in the journal had included directions, scribbled in her handwriting, just like old times. Simple, clear, written with care. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to give my aunt and uncle even a whisper of what I'd found. Instead, I made an appointment with a lawyer, someone recommended by a friend, completely outside the circle of anyone who knew my family. I brought the letter, the private will, and even the journal. After reviewing everything, she looked at me across her desk and said, "This is absolutely worth pursuing. It's not unheard of for someone to leave a secondary informal will, especially if they feared undue influence." I asked, "But does it hold up?" She nodded slowly. "It depends on how it's introduced and what the court sees. But given how personal and specific it is, especially with the property details, it may carry significant weight. And if that cabin was in her name when she passed, this could get very interesting." We filed a notice of interest on the cabin's deed that same week. It turned out the cabin had not been included in the official estate inventory submitted by my aunt and uncle. That was important because it meant they hadn't even known it still existed. They didn't try to claim it because they thought it was gone. 2 weeks later, I made the drive to Willow Bend. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The road turned. Gravelly about a mile before the property. Trees lined both sides, tall and thick with spring green, and I had to roll my window down to breathe in the scent of pine. Then I saw it, just like she described, a small, pale blue cabin with white trim tucked beside a quiet lake. There was a dock out front, a rocking chair on the porch, and 2 small flower beds near the steps. Overgrown now, but still holding patches of lavender. I stood there for a long moment before walking up the steps. The key was right where she said it would be in her note, taped to the underside of the 3rd step. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like cedar and old books. There was dust, yes, but the place was solid, a fireplace in the corner. The same mismatched teacups we'd used when I visited once as a kid. A quilt she'd sewn draped over the couch. It didn't feel like a prize. It felt like home. The trust fund wasn't enormous. I found out later it was around $85,000, but enough to keep the place maintained and cover property taxes for years, enough to breathe. Enough to finally consider leaving my dead-end job at the diner and going back to school like I always wanted. I didn't say anything to my family, not yet, but word travels. Because 5 days later, Marla sent me a message, just 3 words, "We cly. Need to talk." Marla's message sat in my inbox for a full day before I replied. "About what?" I wrote back. She didn't beat around the bush. "You know what? Grandma's cabin. I know you're there." Aunt Linda is furious. Furious? She hadn't even mentioned the cabin during the will reading. They hadn't listed it in the estate documents. They probably assumed it had been sold years ago. Or maybe they thought it wasn't worth anything. Either way, they didn't expect me to end up with it. I ignored the message. A day later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. "Emily," Aunt Linda's voice said, clipped and forced. "We need to discuss some things. Call me back when you can. This isn't how your grandmother intended things to be divided." I replayed it twice, stunned by the irony. She was finally using the phrase, "how your grandmother intended," after willfully ignoring exactly that. The truth is, I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to make them suffer or drag the family name through legal mud. That's not who I am, and Grandma knew that. But I did want the truth to be recognized, so I had my lawyer send them a formal notice. The cabin had been excluded from the estate, and I was the rightful owner per a signed, notarized personal will and private letter. It included copies of the documents and the trust account confirmation. Aunt Linda responded through her attorney, a carefully worded email expressing shock that such documents existed and a vague insinuation that I must have influenced Grandma somehow. We had a choice. Settle this quietly or take it to court. My lawyer gave me solid advice. "You're on strong footing. But a fight will be slow, public, and expensive. If your goal is peace, not punishment, we can offer a resolution. So I did. I offered to keep everything quiet, no public claims, no press, no court filings, if they agreed to recognize the cabin and trust is mine and leave it untouched going forward. They agreed, not because they were kind, because they were scared they'd lose. I stayed at the cabin that summer. I cleaned it, painted the porch, replanted lavender in the garden beds. I brought up boxes of old photos, organized them in albums, and started writing. Just journaling at first, but eventually drafting personal essays about my childhood, Grandma, and the strange things families do to each other. By fall, I applied for an online degree in social work. I wanted to help other people like me, people who were raised in the quiet shadows of messy families and made to feel invisible. 3. Trust covered most of the tuition. Marla reached out one last time. "Why didn't she leave me anything from the cabin?" she asked. I thought about it for a while before responding. "Because she knew you'd never see its value if it didn't have a price tag." She never wrote back. On the 1-year anniversary of Grandma's passing, I sat on the dock just before sunset. The lake was still, the sky golden, the air smelling like pine and distant wood smoke. I opened her letter again, the one Walter gave me, and read it slowly. Every word, every curve of her pen. She hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't failed me. She just knew how some people operated, and how others kept faith even when they had nothing left to stand on but hope. She left me the only thing that ever truly mattered, her trust, and it changed everything.